Happy Tuesday. Welcome everybody to today's webinar. This is the third in the fourth, it's the third one out of a four-part series in our Excellence in College Counseling series, helping families cross the FAFSA finish line. My name is Rajay Branch, and I manage our student and family texting interventions at Common App. And so it's a pleasure to join you all for today's wonderful conversation. For January through February, we've been celebrating our college counselors, our school counselors, and I want to give a special shout out to Miami Palmetto Senior High School counseling team. I wanted to get that right for this year's winner. Last week, we celebrated National School Counseling Week. And I want to give a special shout out to my high school counselor, Jennifer Woody at Maricosta High School, who was instrumental in helping me get to college and get through college. Before we get started, I want to share a few housekeeping things. I've been told there's a whole production behind the scenes, everyone. And so I'm following instructions as close as possible. And so I've been told that if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I think it is. It's the Q&A. I know sometimes we use the chat function, but for today, we're going to use the Q&A function. And if there's a question that you really vibe with that someone else sent that you're like, yep, I really want that asked, just put the thumbs up next to that question so those behind the scenes can make sure that I ask that question. I want this to be a dynamic conversation, and I want you all involved. And so if there's a question that you really want asked, put a thumbs up next to it, and we'll make sure that we'll do our best to make sure that that question gets asked. I want to also spend a quick moment in welcoming our panelists, letting you know who's joining us today. First and foremost, we have Ashley Bianchi, the Director of Student Financial Services at Williams College, joining us from Massachusetts. She said it's snowing and pretty cold, but thank you, Ashley, for joining us. Next up, I want to welcome Maisha Challenger, who's the Awareness and Outreach Specialist for the U.S. Department of Education, what I affectionately call ED, and she's working in the Federal Student Aid Department at ED. So welcome, Maisha. And last but certainly not least, we have Jessica Johnson, who's the founder and executive director of the Scholarship Academy. Jessica, you're in Atlanta, right?
Yes, in Atlanta.
All righty. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and get right into today's conversation. We know that paying for college can often be one of the largest barriers, right? And if you're a first generation college student like I was, it's a whole thing. It's a whole process. It's sometimes scary. It's new. And so I want to first ask this question to all of our panelists. Can you talk about how you got into the financial aid space? Like, was this something that you wanted to do when you were in like fourth grade? You told your teacher, when I grow up, I want to work in financial aid. I guess I want all of our panelists to answer that question. Ashley, I'll start off with you.
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm so happy to be a part of this really esteemed panel. So what an honor it is. And how I got into financial aid, definitely not by choice, but I'm really happy to be here today. I'm a first generation college student. And when I was going through the college process, there wasn't a lot of process involved. I graduated with 17 other people at a place where maybe half of the teachers had gone to college. So
Wow.
a lot of college going culture. And so when I chose to go to college, I chose my flagship state university, and that was the only place I applied to. And that was how it went. Fortunately for me, that worked out really well. I loved my college experience and got really involved in various organizations on campus that then allowed me to, during my senior year, say, hey, how do I keep going to college? And so I was able to meet with actually my Greek life advisor at the time to say, hey, you can do something like me. And so that's what I thought I would do. So I went and got a master's in higher education from the University of South Carolina. And then my first job just happened to be at the University of South Carolina is a place, terrific place for a master's in higher ed for the record, but also is a place that does a lot of placement. And so my first job, they were sort of like, here's your job. And so it was in a financial aid office, which was terrific. And so I sort of got the financial aid bug at that point and have started out the College of Charleston and then have been in the private space since 2013. No, actually, yes, that's right, 2013. So that's how I got to where I am, and really interested in helping families understand financial aid, understand financing, and really attune to those costs that are beyond what the college charges and how families deal with those costs. So that's really where my interest is.
That's great. It's sort of like for some of us in higher ed, we went to college and just decided we never wanted to leave. And so we wanted to keep helping students in that space. And so I'm going to go ahead to Maisha. How did you end up in financial aid?
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Ashley, I so love listening to other people's stories and how they came to be and the passion they feel for their particular profession. I have a really interesting, unique story. So I went to grad school. I got a master's in public administration. I was a paralegal for years. And I was like, okay, I love law. I want to go to law school. Then I realized, I was like, I don't know if I want to be a lawyer. So I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to impact the law. And so I went to American and got my master's in public administration and actually became an education lobbyist, because I knew that if I wanted to affect change, I'm going to go into lobbying, and I loved it. I was on the Hill. It was fast paced. And then I lost my job. So this is a true story. I lost my job back in, it's been a couple of years ago, not a couple of years, probably 8-10 years ago, and became a substitute teacher at a charter school in Washington, D.C., because I love the kids. I've always liked impacting kids. And so when I was lobbying for HBCUs that were impacted by Hurricane Katrina. And so I needed a job. So I became a substitute teacher and was literally teaching kids every day. And I realized that I was impactful in the classroom, but I also wanted to impact the policy itself. So I applied for a position at the U.S. Department of Education. And this is a true story. After being out of a job for probably a year and a half, I was offered 2 positions in the same week, and I got to pick. So I always tell people,
that's always nice.
Yeah, you never know the journey that you're on, even though you're like, why is this happening? But there's a reason for everything. And so I am an outreach specialist. So I literally travel the country talking about the importance of financial aid. I'm sure we're going to talk about loans, but I need you all to understand I'm really passionate about impacting students. I love when I give presentations. I gave a presentation I'm in Brooklyn, to Connecticut public schools, and there are about 1,100 kids. And I think at the time there were like 100 kids on, but as long as you can impact one person and give them information, that
absolutely
really is the key. So that's how I came to be in financial aid. And I do love my job. It's very rewarding.
Thanks for sharing, Maisha. And Jessica, what about you?
Yeah, awesome stories, ladies. I'm just grateful to be in the presence of some dynamic college access and financial aid advocates. So my story actually starts as early as the 8th grade. So I am a 3rd generation educator. My mom taught at my high school, and college conversations were dinner conversations in my house. I knew I was going, but I knew to some extent that my parents weren't rich, right? So I was talking to my mom about college. We were driving to school and I was throwing out Harvard, Yale. And then she just drove to the bank and printed out her bank statement and said, we don't have the money to send you to any amazing schools, but you've got to figure it out on your own. And so that kind of scholarship scared straight approach put me on the fast track to figure out how my financial aid and my college aspirations wouldn't be a burden on like my parents' budget. And so by the time I finished my junior year in high school, I had $50,000 in private scholarships and just was really journey to figure out how I could go to college and not owe anybody anything. Landed at Howard, ended up with more than $200,000 in scholarships. And so really started this work in my dorm room at college. I was the scholarship lady. People would pay me $50 and I would
Grassroots.
to be able to stay in school. And now that has grown into this kind of regional and national work to make sure that families have a college funding plan.
I love that. Thank you for sharing your stories. I hope that our participants who are listening also enjoyed them as much as I did. So Maisha, oftentimes we hear this question that there are billions of dollars on the table. When First Lady Michelle Obama was going on speaking tours, that was always like one of the top lines she'd always say when talking about higher education. How are billions of dollars left on the table? Like, I wish I could just like sign up to get it, but can you talk about like how this is happening?
Right. How much time do we have? So, so listen, everyone, I do work for the U.S. Department of Education, but I also want to share what resources are there. So I always feel like people have this stigma, like, oh, it's the department, they want us to take out loans. Listen, I always say loans are an investment, but the reality is that a lot of people have a lot of myths about financial aid, right? We were talking about someone that once they finish undergrad, they may owe $600,000, $700,000. So the reality is that college costs are going up and a lot of people don't have the resources. And so Rajay, you said, why is money left on the table? Because I think a lot of people are afraid, or they have all these misnomers. Well, one of the myths we have is, I don't have good grades, so you have to have good grades to get financial aid. That's false. Or my parents make too much money. So I think and that's false. There's no income cutoff. So everyone qualifies for some form of financial aid. I think that there are a lot of people that are just afraid of what the process looks like. They hear about the FAFSA form, right? The free application for federal student aid. That's part of the title in this panel discussion.
Hard to say.
Yes, it is an acronym. The federal government loves acronyms, okay? But it is a free application. You all have heard from some amazing dynamic women. There are so many people out here that can help. And the FAFSA is tied to so many other forms of assistance. So I just think that a lot of people have a lot of myths about the form. And then, in this virtual world, I feel like people are not, applying to school anymore, or they're so worried about it. Listen, if you're going to school in the fall, that financial aid is still very much part of the process. So I think there's just a lot of myths, and that's one of the big reasons why that $120 billion, not million, $1 billion. B, right? I always ask the kids, how many zeros is that? They're like 6. I'm like, no, it's 9. It's a lot of money. It's $120 billion that's left because of a lot of misnomers and people just not being aware of what they need to know.
Thank you, Maisha. You spoke a little bit about the myths. So Jessica, I'm going to ask you to chime in, and you're working directly with students. And what are some of the hindrances or some of those roadblocks that you're seeing as students are trying to complete their FAFSA and access this billions of dollars that's out there?
So I think one of the greatest challenges is that we wait until students become seniors to really dig our heels and build what I call like their financial aid muscle, right? So we're encountering seniors and their first time hearing of the word FAFSA is their senior year. And I challenge college access advisors to do financial aid differently. We should start 8th and 9th grade really building their confidence in the financial aid process terms, so that we are not in this panic mode February of their senior year, trying to pull miracles out of a hat and make sure that they get all of the forms completed on time. We know that there's parent engagement challenges. We know that a lot of times now there's hesitancy around the financial aid process for a number of reasons, but I think that and just a strategy. There's so much rigor around SAT and ACT prep, so much rigor around good fit college selection. And ultimately, we just let financial aid happen and hope that it's going to work out at the last minute. And what happens is families are seeing larger and larger gaps in their financial aid packages just because they didn't start early enough. There's scholarships for second graders, so you don't have to wait until you get to FAFSA.
Wait, scholarship for second graders?
Yes, there's scholarship money out there for students as early as second grade. So we're waiting until it's an emergency across the board. And I think this year during the pandemic is a time to really challenge ourselves to think about financial aid from more of a longitudinal lens.
Thank you. That's interesting. I've never heard of this as early as second grade. So that's just like mind blowing to me. As I think about some of my nieces and nephews, I think I might have to start putting them up on game a little bit earlier. Ashley, you're at the other end of the table, right? You are in the higher education space. You were talking to college students, oftentimes students who you're trying to get to come to Williams. What do things look like from your end? What are you telling students? And can you talk a little bit about the importance of those individuals who work in the financial aid offices at universities?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So you're right. So I start my earliest conversations with students and families is typically depending upon, how prepared they are and how, college ready they are, sophomore, maybe junior year. But of course that ramps up a lot in the student's senior year. And then, my favorite part of my job is that I get to actually see them from the time they apply all the way through graduation. And so we always say in my office, like, our favorite day of the year is graduation, because we get to see sort of that culmination of all the work that everyone has put in for students and students on for themselves. But so I would say, part of my role and part of the team that I lead is to make sure that students understand what the requirements are, to break down as many barriers as we can, knowing that we can't
Right.
them all down, but break down as many barriers as we can. And then for those that need it, that hand-holding piece. Right before I got on this call, I had a list of 11 students, 11 Williams students who still have applied for financial aid for the current year, which means attended all of fall and are about to start in the spring term and still haven't applied for financial aid. So those 11 students needed me to have a phone call. So I spent my last hour and a half calling students, and whoever picked up the phone, I needed to have a conversation with and understand. So that is really, I think, my colleagues across the country and certainly who do this well. And there's so many of us who do this really, really well. And I think, one of the myths or misconceptions is that financial aid folks are just paper pushers and that we're gatekeepers. And that is just, it's not true. I can totally see why it comes across that way. Again, there's so many regulations that we're responsible for that we don't actually, maybe even agree with, but that's our role. But at the end of the day, each person kind of takes their role and makes it their own.
Mm-hmm.
As much as we can to make college education possible. And whether you're at a open access institution that is trying to help families who maybe have come out of a really bad situation to come back to college, or whether you're on the very other end where I am currently at Williams, which is a very selective institution, we all have that same heart for students and making sure that students feel a sense of belonging and make sure that they can not only get here but really thrive here.
Stay, right?
Really our role is the thriving piece, and that's what I see my team's job is to make sure students are thriving at their institutions and able to access everything that every institution has that is truly life-changing in so many ways. College was life-changing for me. I imagine is life-changing for many folks out in the audience. And so what my goal is to make sure that life-changing opportunity is presented and push them along the way to make sure they take advantage of it.
Thank you, Ashley. I think you really humanized sort of and put a face behind financial aid, right? Sometimes we think of our financial aid offices as the bad guys who are stopping us from getting all the money we need. You mentioned a little bit about the hand holding and the pushing. Jessica, I want to ask you a question. What are some of the tactics that you're using or that you encourage others to use as they have these conversations with students and their families about financial aid?
Yeah, so we really push like our college access. So we provide trainings for college access providers. And so we really push them to break free of the cookies, right? So if you've been doing the financial aid 101 night, you've got that dusty scholarship drawer, it's time to really think about how do we build a healthier financial aid culture? How do we create a space in our school or in our community where financial aid isn't just happening to students, but they're empowered really with the tools to make educated financial aid decisions. And so what that looks like for us is we go deep. We do what we call financial aid immersion experiences. So we're doing financial aid escape rooms with our 9th and 10th graders, and they are battling over the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans, like intense battles. And
I love it.
that's what it takes, right? We're busting free from the PowerPoint and giving them opportunities to experience it and build their confidence in it so that when they encounter a gap or when they run into an obstacle, they already know how to address it or what resource they have immediate access to support them along that pipeline. And I think, as we're pushing more counselors to think about other ways you can engage. There's mobile apps, there's, the virtual office hours. And in this pandemic time, we've got to think about like not doing financial aid just a little differently to meet students where they are in the process.
I love that. And in talking about the innovation that you utilize at Scholarship Academy, we got a question in the chat that I think works perfectly for this. And it's something that we talked about in our conversation in preparation for this discussion. And the question is, so the large search engines like FastWeb are overwhelming for students. What are the best places for students to apply to scholarships? And are those search engines really worth applying to? It's a hard question, but we're busting out of our PowerPoints and out of our cookie cutter
Yeah.
stuff, and we're going to have this real conversation.
Yeah, so I think what happens with a lot of those major scholarship databases, and definitely my co-panelists chime in, I don't want to be the bad guy, is that a lot of times they give every student the same kind of top 50 run-of-the-mill scholarships. You got the wearing duct tape to the prom, they've got Ron Brown, Jackie Robinson. And so students are really scrambling, trying to apply for those big bucks, and they get discouraged, right? If you were submitting 10, 20, 30 applications and not getting any feedback, that would be discouraging as an adult. And so what we really challenge our students to do is focus on the local and state-based money. So our online tool, the Virtual Scholarship Center, we custom build it for our kids. We take the time and say, okay, you want to do engineering in Georgia, the Georgia Engineering Foundation is your scholarship. It has your name on it. We're going to add it to your profile, right? And so I think some of that really intentionality around the local and state-based money and money that's really connected to who the students are. Like we focus so much on the database and we're encouraging students to apply, but we haven't asked the tough question, what have they done that would make them competitive for a $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 scholarship? So an understanding of what we call their brand and the money that be looking for that type of student is a deeper conversation that I think we have to have and get out of application mode, get into competitive mode, and really think about how do we use our community resources to build students up so they can be positioned to win some of that money.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to switch gears and go back to the FAFSA conversation. And this is something that organically came to mind. For some of our students, they might not have the family support or the community support, right? That is truly customary and sometimes necessary to help them through this financial aid process. Maisha, what does that look like when these students are trying to fill out the FAFSA?
Yeah, so just to kind of, Jessica just gave some wonderful insight. I think that I'm just thinking about the places that people can go for assistance, right? That's really what it boils down to. Whether you're talking about the financial aid office, whether you're talking about scholarships, whether you're talking about federal financial aid, all of those pieces tie into getting a student to go to college and hopefully having some assistance to help. So, when the question is, where can they go, especially in this virtual setting. I feel like, so the first thing is you shouldn't be paying anyone. So that's another thing. I feel like I've had so many people tell me, well, I didn't know what to do, so I hired someone. There's way too many resources. So the federal government, I mentioned the 1-800-4-FED-AID number. It's 1-800-433-3243. But here's the thing, we're the federal government. Everyone doesn't feel comfortable talking to the federal government. Some people may feel a little more comfortable, and I understand that, and that's great. So I think that another great thing is finding out if you're in your respective state. So I was thinking about what Jessica said, where to look for money. The federal government gives money, the state gives money. I always say the institution gives money, and their scholarships. So those are the 4 pots that I think you can go to when it comes to looking for assistance. So if you're a parent, and I know these are all counselors, you really have to, engage some of the college access organizations, some of the specific companies like maybe that Jessica has that are creating these spaces that can help students for free. I think the reality is that there are definitely resources locally that counselors can access. And then the counselors themselves, counselors are like, hey, what about us? They're the ones doing a lot of the work with the students and families. So I feel like, we have to direct some of the students and families to the resources at the local level, but also the high school counselors, the college access organizations that are also doing the same work that the government is, but on a more local level, working directly with the students and families.
Thank you. So Maisha, earlier you said something that was actually one of my questions about college being an investment. And really, I think the question that it gets at, and this is a tough question, is college worth it? Right? And explaining that when you're taking on amounts of debt. I have college debt. And so Ashley, being that you're in a financial aid office, how do you talk to debt? How do you talk to your students about debt and the price of college?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also have college debt, just to be clear. And I typically start there, especially if I'm talking in a large group, or I'm trying to sort of get students to understand. I talk about the fact that I wouldn't be where I am today without college debt. I know where I'd be. I'd be, in rural Mississippi, probably working at a farm job, probably making, a living in Mississippi, but I certainly wouldn't have had the experiences and wouldn't be, the fulfilled person that I feel like I am. And so, I talk about it as an absolute choice and investment that I made in myself. And, I present it as, what a better way to invest than invest in yourself. Who else can you count on more than yourself? And so, I love that Maisha said the investment, because that's exactly what I talk about all the time. But then I also talk about what is necessary. I can tell you that some of my college debt at this moment, unfortunately, it was not necessary. And it was because I chose a lifestyle, especially in grad school. Grad school is where I really got to. I know where I got a little crazy, where grad school was, my lifestyle was a little bit more than it should have been. And it was easy because you have access to loans in grad school, especially that are higher levels than you would probably need. And so, you just kind of have to balance that. What is really important. One of the examples I use, I'll bring this down to a local example, is one of the examples I use is when I talk to students about studying away. And leaving the country for the first time in their lives, right?
Where my loans went.
Right. Yeah. I didn't do that as a college student. And it's one of my biggest regrets. And so when I talk to a student who's never been out of the country before, who has an opportunity maybe to go on a summer program or on a winter, between semester program, a couple $1,000 to do that. And they're very, very scared. Most of our students don't take loans at Williams. And so they're very scared about this idea because they haven't had to think about loans yet, right, for their normal semester. And so they're like, oh no, I can't do that. And so I, talk to them, I say, is this about, what are you going to get out of this? And is it an internship that you're planning to do? Is it studying, traveling the world? What is it you're going to get out of this? And is it worth, a $2,000 investment that at $50 a month, you'll pay off in, what, two years max, that sort of thing. And so you think about it that way and sort of start to break it down into small payments and things like that. And that's to a family to discuss and to understand. And where Jessica said earlier, starting earlier, never ever start to talk about borrowing in April of your senior year after you have all these financial aid offers on the table. And then that's the first time that you and your family have talked about, should we borrow a $3,000 student loan for 4 years? Like, first of all, that's a lot of money, right? That's
Right.
$12,000 for a lot of families. That is a huge amount of money. And if you're making that decision in a moment where you have all this other stuff swirling in your head, you have peer pressure, you pressure from your family, pressure from your high school, like that is not the time to make good, sound decisions. And so having those conversations early about kind of minimum and maximum amounts, how much do we feel comfortable as a family borrowing, how long do we want to pay this off, what are my future plans, those sorts of things are all conversations that if you have them sophomore, junior year, where the stakes are low, you don't even know if you're getting into college yet. Of course, you're going to get into college because you can get into college, but you having those conversations panic is a really good way to think about it. I hope I answered your question. I think I got a little off topic there. Sorry.
No, you did. Thank you. Jessica, how are you talking to your students about debt? Because for some, taking loans is just a part of the game, right? You're going to have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, so, of course, at Scholarship Academy, we say the loans are a bad word, but as we are encouraging students, a couple of things, right? We want to try to keep it 10,000 or less because research says that's the number that low-income students particularly are much more likely to maintain matriculation. So that's our internal goal. If they have to do it, 10,000 or less, so that they can actually handle that burden. What we don't want is our low-income students to graduate and they're going back into their neighborhoods owing $150,000. Have we really helped break the cycles of poverty if that's the situation we put them in? I would have to say no, right? But we're also saying don't put it on autopilot. So if you have to take out debt in your first year, then don't let that happen your second year. Think aggressively communicate and canvass your campus to find out about alumni scholarships, departmental money. I think a lot of students just sign on the dotted line, and parents sign on the dotted line every year, and they're not advocating for themselves within their university with all of the resources and endowments that would be available to reduce their debt upon graduation. And then, I mean, honestly, it kind of boils down to making smart choices. So if you are going to do the $50,000 loan versus, you only owe $5,000 and you want to, we talked a lot. We talk a lot about, safety schools. To me, a safety school is one that you can get in and it's paid for, right? And I don't think we always add that and it's paid for part to our language. And so as students are even considering, like, really, there's so many college cost calculators. The student has one that collegecost.ed.gov, like really crunching the numbers and anticipating not just the first year, but all 4 years. And then what are those roadblocks? What happens if tuition increases by 3%? How much money do you need to start building into your financial aid plan so that you can leave there with owing them the least amount of money possible?
Jessica, there's a clarifying question. Is the goal of 10,000, is that per year or is that for the total 4 years?
So we would say per year, right? Depending on kind of where their school is, but if it's less than 10, our students are averaging around, now we're closer to like 8,500 is what we're seeing the gap be now per year. And then we're actively saying, but replace that for the second year so that now it's down to maybe 3,000. So you're leaving owing less at the end.
Got it. Thank you. So there's always a COVID question these days, right? We know that COVID has severely impacted all ways, shapes, and forms of life. And one of those, unfortunately, is our financial circumstances for some folks. And so, Maisha, how do families represent that on the FAFSA with taxes and forms, and like, how do families communicate that so that students who, need the extra bit of help get that help?
That's a good question. I know that's a good question for Ashley too. But for me on the front end, but Rajay, the reality is FAFSA applications are down. People are not applying for financial aid. It is nationwide. The numbers are down in every state. Some states are double digits. So, and that's largely due to COVID, because people are afraid, or they're like, well, are we virtual? Do we have to go in person? But either way, we need to continue to promote that we need students to attend college, first and foremost, because it's still there. And B, they still need to apply for financial aid. So right now, the current FAFSA cycle is the 21-22 FAFSA. So if anyone is applying for financial aid right now that wants to go to school in the fall, the FAFSA application came out October 1 of last year, which means we asked for something called prior 2019's tax information, right? So that's the normal procedure and process for filling out the FAFSA. Now, there are a lot of people that are like, well, wait a minute, 2019 I was working, but 2020 I lost my job, COVID happened. So this is where, and I mentioned Ashley, for the FAFSA purposes, and I need you all to hear this, this is the direction you would share with students and families. We still want 2019's information. We are not asking them to put 2020's information, but what they would do is talk to the financial aid office at the particular school that they're attending. And the financial aid office is going to absolutely give guidance, because the reality is people's lives have been impacted completely, and that needs to be taken into account. But again, on the front end, when we're talking about assistance, the form is asking still for 2019's information. But if there has been something drastically different that happens, you would then talk to the school, and then the school would still try to assemble an award package. I think the other thing I just wanted to say really quickly is when we're talking about the cost of attendance, and Ashley and Jessica have mentioned this, financial aid, if it covers, we keep talking about that gap. I think a lot of people think that financial aid is going to cover everything. And they're like, oh, school's going to be free. I feel like that's a myth too. I feel like people go into, they're like, well, once I apply for the FAFSA, I'm going to get state aid, and I'm going to get scholarships. There's still more than likely, it's going to happen. So I need people to understand that if that does happen, that means there's some extra due diligence that needs to happen, but you still need to apply as much as possible for all the resources that are available.
And before Ashley jumps in, I just want to speak to the emergency that we're in right now, right? So according to NCAN, National College Attainment Network, only I think about 35, as of January 22nd, only about 35% of students from the class of 2021 have completed the FAFSA. And I think Meredith just dropped the tracker in the chat, but applications are down 10%. And for low-income students and students who are schools who are serving primarily students of color, they're down between 13 and 15%. And so I think, at the very minimum, we need to make sure that our students are completing the FAFSA at the very minimum to have any type of access to aid. And then we can go forward with, okay, now where are the private scholarships and where are the local community scholarships? From my experience at the baseline, there was the FAFSA. Ashley, do you want to talk to maybe a little bit about sort of that gap, and then also going back to the question of, with COVID, how should students and families communicate their financial circumstances?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're exactly right that, the first step that any financial aid office will tell you is to start with the application, right? Because we have to have what we call baseline data. And baseline data, as Maisha said, is that data that for the year that we're talking about. So for the high school seniors, we are looking for 2019 data, knowing that we can absolutely take 2020 data on appeal and get that going. And I know the minute I say appeal, everybody's like, oh, no, that's more paperwork. And that's true. This is all about, advocating. One of the things I always talk about with students is you're your own best advocate, right? I don't know what is happening in your world unless you tell me what's happening in your world. And so, step one is to do the FAFSA, to make sure that, there snow plows outside my house. I just got distracted. Make sure that that all of the information that you can provide ahead of time is provided. And then as soon as you can do that, follow up with the financial aid office and make sure they understand, yes, my 2019 looked like this, but in March I lost my job and I haven't been able to find a new one yet. And so really, here's what my 2020 looks like. We are far enough into 2020 now. You should have your 2020 parents should have their 2020 W-2s. Those were required by January 31st. So parents should have their 2020 W-2s that can tell a different story. As soon as you've seen this, I know online, I saw it yesterday, the IRS is very much encouraging you to file your taxes early so that if we get more stimulus money, that it can be based on your 2020 tax return. So go ahead and file your taxes if you can do that, families. Obviously counselors tell your families this, so that when we ask for, okay, great, thank you for telling us that 2019 is not representative anymore. Can we have your 2020? You have those right in front of you, ready to go. And then we can update your award as soon as we do that. So that is, again, doing your due diligence, narrowing that list down to really the schools who you're most interested in, and then asking them to do that extra work with you. That's what we're going to be doing from now until August, is really working family by family to do that. And we did that for early decision. So if you had families like that in early decision, we did that in early decision too, and we'll continue to do that. So I think that's really important, and something that the best thing that I can give you advice on is to start to make those relationships with your financial aid office. I know we are intimidating folks. I know it is scary to talk about money. I totally get it. But this is the moment where you have to start to forge that relationship, because I'm going to be the one on the other side of the graduation stage, like cheering you on and standing there in my robe, giving you a high five when we can touch each other again. And that is going to be like that you're going to remember this relationship for a long, long time. So that's really important.
Listen, everybody in the financial aid office knew my name by senior year. I was knocking on the door. Hey, it's me. Any extra scholarships? Any extra funding? What do you need? How can I help? So I can get some extra funds. And it actually helped, because when I did end up going abroad, right, like my senior year, and I was in a pinch, and my mom said, like, looked at the bottom of her purse and said, there's nothing there. I had to go to Debbie in the financial aid office and let her know, I'm supposed to be going abroad in 6 weeks and I need help funding this. Help me, please. Ashley, you used a loaded word that I think counselors sometimes really have a hard time explaining, right, to our students and families. One of the words was appeals. And I also want to throw in another loaded word out there, verification. And so this is open to whoever wants to take this, because it's a lot, right? Can we talk about verification first? What does that mean? What does that look like? How do we break that down? And then the next word, appeals. If anyone wants to take verification first, please do. Any takers?
Okay. Ashley, I was waiting. Listen, I feel like
I was waiting for you.
Right. I was like, oh gosh, please no. So I feel like verification is like Voldemort in Harry Potter world, right? I mean, I love Harry Potter. It's the curse. People see it that way, right? So verification, for those, I feel like all the counselors are like, we know. Oh, trust me, we know. But verification is part of the process. It is something that you need to know. And it basically is where the school requires supporting documentation for the information that you are putting on the FAFSA. And a lot of times verification gets a bad rap because, and I'm sure Jessica and Ashley can attest to this, students are like, well, why am I being flagged? If you get flagged once, does that mean you're probably going to get flagged again? Probably, pretty much. So verification, there's this stigma behind verification. It's like, why am I being flagged? Well, more than likely, it's because there's something that you put on the form that may or may not add up. So for example, on the FAFSA application, you're either independent or dependent. If you're considered independent, so there's various criteria, an award of the court, legal guardianship, homeless, more than likely the school is going to ask for supporting documentation. So, and I'm just going to speak from that space, because I just feel like there's so many stigmas around verification, but people are like, why do we have to have it? I just think that's the reality. You're being given a lot of money. so I feel like, you know, there has to be some type of justification that is necessary from the school to provide you with the assistance that you need. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'll let the other two panelists speak more to it.
No, you're exactly right. That's the very definition, is that, you know, we have a couple of bad actors in the world, unfortunately, and the verification process is set up for those bad actors, right? People who make up numbers, who, you know, give us data that is incorrect. For the large majority, and the data shows this, the large majority of people and say and tell us the right information, and we give them the right financial aid. But you know, there is a amount of my job that is a steward of both the federal dollars, state dollars, and institutional dollars. And so that is the part of my job where that's who we are. And so, you know, that is totally, you know, when someone's giving you money and it is based on how much money you make and there's no other way to verify it, then that's what we have to do. The great news is that in my career, at least over the past 20 years, we've come so far. And there have been so many positive changes through the Department of Education that has made verification less cumbersome. And based on the package that passed in late December, there's going to be even less of that, as I understand it, moving forward. And a lot of that is because of you and your advocacy as college counselors that's made it that way. So I would say, you know, hang on, verification is a pain in the butt. The good news is it shouldn't be a surprise. You know immediately if you're selected for verification. It says it right on the financial aid form that comes back from the Department of Education. And every student should be prepared with whatever they put on their documents. They should be prepared to give that to the college. So the way that I sort of combat the verification thing, it is a real stumbling block. I will totally acknowledge that, is that if you can prepare ahead of time and just assume you're going to be selected, then as soon as we ask for that information, you're ready for it, and you don't miss a step and you don't miss any part of the timeline.
Thank you.
Just interject one
Of
key
course.
word. Ashley, you said the critical word timeline. So in my mind, one of the things I'm thinking is, you know, we've got 35% in Georgia of students who submitted their FAFSA applications, but that's still almost 70% of students who are in basically without a clear understanding of where they are financially, and they graduate in May, right? And so I think that we have to do a much better job. They changed the FAFSA date for a reason, so we could do our due diligence and create more of a runway for families to get this process, if they have to be verified, to get through that process, so they know how much aid they have at the table. I think what happens is we're February, March, April, now it's an emergency, and you get surprised by, you know, what those final numbers shake out to be. And I think we have to do our part to push up our timeline so we can support students earlier in this pipeline.
And I want to get to that timeline in just a second, but I do want to get to the appeals part too, right? Because I think sometimes when we get these packages, we look at, you know, the financial aid offer letter, and we see it and we're like, okay, that's it. Guess I can't go to the school because I can't afford it. How do you encourage students and families to advocate for themselves? What can you tell these counselors, right, that they should be telling their students and families to get the aid that they need, even if they have to ask again and again?
Yeah. I always say the worst we can say is no, right? So, I mean, that's the worst we could say. So why not do that? Again, I know it's more effort. I know it's more work. And I acknowledge that fact. And, you know, I can say with assurance that most, if not all, colleges are really putting their best foot forward on the first award. But again, if you haven't told us everything, or if there's something has changed since you completed your forms, we need to know that. And so, yes, you're right. The appeal process is arduous. It is a compressed amount of time, even if you're doing regular decision, which should give you the most amount of time, or early action. But I have seen a lot of success stories where we just misunderstood something. You've misreported something. You've reported your retirement assets in your investments instead, those sorts of things where you get your award letter and you're like, okay, completely out of the, there's a moment of like, oh, I can't afford this. And like, are they crazy? Like, there's the differences, right? And so, the are they crazy part is an easier appeal process because we clearly have just made an error. One of us, either the inputter or the outputter, has made an error. But from other things, it never hurts to ask. I have a whole presentation I do on appeals, but basically it's sincerity. It's you get more flies with sugar, or was it honey than
honey.
That
yeah.
Be kind, be nice, and it could come to me with a sincere, like, I was planning to pay $5,000, you're asking me to pay $8,000. Is there any way we can get any closer? Like those are the kinds of conversations that I have during this time frame that are really successful. And again, the worst we can say is no.
Can I interject for a second?
Absolutely.
Ashley, thank you so much for saying that. It is so imperative that counselors hear that. I advocate those very words when I do my presentations. The worst they can say is no. I think that's just a life lesson. Anything that you want, the worst they can say is no. All you have to do is ask, because you don't know. When you are packaged, like you said, that's what the school is giving you based on what you've put down. However, maybe there's some institutional aid. Maybe there's something that they didn't know about, or like you said, Ashley, something you needed to change. But the reality is, you absolutely, it doesn't hurt to ask. I had a mentee who went to North Carolina A. She went to FAMU initially, and she transferred to North Carolina A&T. But her first package was loans, straight A student. And I was like, you are not going all the way across, into Florida from Washington, D.C. for some loans. And she went and spoke to them, and they completely revised her package. And it's only because she did the work. So that's the other thing. You got to do the work. It's not just going to happen magically, but because she was determined to do it, they found more money. So, and that's not always the case. So I don't want people to think just because I said go, they're going to find the money, but you don't know. So Ashley, it's great to hear that is also what you also strive to provide to the students if they choose to come back and see if there's more assistance available.
Thank you. Okay, so this is I'm looking at the time, and this question was like blowing up in the chat. Like, it got lots of thumbs up and people were sending it in. Jessica, what is sort of like your ideal timeline, your longitudinal timeline, and I'm using that directly from the question, for students when they're applying for financial aid? Let's say if we're going to start at maybe 8th grade. We won't start as early as 2nd grade, right? But for the middle schooler who's getting ready to transition to high school, what does the financial aid application process look like, or looking for scholarships look like?
Yeah, so I think what we encourage like our 8th, 9th, and 10th graders to do is start building what we call their scholarship brand. And so their leadership matters, their community involvement matters, right? I raised $200,000 in scholarships because I was starting my own nonprofit organizations when I was in 10th grade. And so I think that there's a number of things that we can do in that 8th through 10th grade window to build their knowledge of the terms and processes, to make them comfortable and confident, and then to teach them about the power of their brand and how those attributes can contribute to them being competitive for money. And then really by 9th grade, if I were being aggressive, I would say there's tons of competitions students can be nominated for, but then there's some of those other skills-based or talent-based competitions. So the VFW has that $30,000 oratorical competition that students can do as early as 9th grade. And so getting them in the habit of competitive writing and competitive applications, they're not necessarily taught how to write competitively in school. And so if you're building that 8th through 10th grade, I think that's the perfect timeline. And then by the time they're junior juniors and you've got the posses and some of those other bigger dollar opportunities, they've got a resume and a portfolio that puts them in a position to really win some of those top dollar awards. So if I were going to start there, that would be the ideal timeline.
Thank you for sharing that. I know a lot of our counselors were asking that question, and we'll definitely be able to use that as they frame some of their college prep activities. So we have 5 minutes left, and I know that seems like a lot of time, but in the world of webinars, it's 30 seconds probably. I want to do like a quick whip around. The top question that we've received is resources. Like, what are some resources that you suggest or would throw out there that counselors can give to their students and families? And so, Ashley, I'm going to start with you. What's your like rapid fire, maybe resources that you want them to know about?
Yeah, happy to. Well, now that I know Jessica, I'm going to point to Jessica. But before I knew Jessica, I always talk about local scholarships, local, your church, and they're not huge amounts of money, but they really add up. Your church, your local, companies, your parents' employers, those sorts of things is where I always start. And then just because we have used it in the past with some successes. The College Board Bright Futures has some great resources, I think, that have done a really nice job. And then FSA has done a terrific job. I'm not saying that because Maisha's on the call, but FSA has done a great job of really curating a lot of things. So those are the places that we point families to make sure that they understand. And I know this was a question in the chat, and so I'll just put it here is, in addition to the resources that you're looking for outside, ask how that's going to affect your financial aid package at the institution, because the worst thing we don't want students to do is to make all this work for themselves and then it actually not, impact your actual bottom line financial aid. And that's because if schools have already met your need, then we can't go above meeting your need with these outside scholarships. So that, just say that as a word of caution, is as you're moving through this outside scholarship and this resource finding process, and match that, align that with everything that you've done on the institution side to do your research there.
Thank you, Ashley. Maisha?
Okay, I'll go quick. The Department of Education has a lot of really great resources. I wanted to mention College Scorecard because it doesn't always have to be a four-year school. There's a lot of different schools that the money can go towards. So I just wanted to emphasize that it's important to understand that we have some resources to check, because I didn't know where I wanted to go to school. So you can use College Scorecard to look for topic, 2-year, 4-year. For counselors and mentors, the Financial Aid Toolkit is a wonderful website that we have. We also have a lot of social media resources. We have a Twitter page, we have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page. We have wonderful YouTube videos that you can embed on your respective organization's website for free. And also, just very quickly, a lot of you were like, oh, there's changes. We heard the EFC is going away. So everyone's like, wait a minute, what's happening? I wanted to just touch on that. That is going to happen it's not going to happen for a few years. It's not something that's going to happen immediately this year. So we're hoping to provide some guidance, hopefully at some point soon, but know that a lot of the changes that you've heard about will probably happen. Some things are going to go away, but the impact, people are like, what is that going to mean? That's still to be determined, but it'll happen in a couple of years. So just stay tuned.
Thank you. I didn't know that. So that's good to know. Maisha, or no, we did Maisha. Jessica, jumping to Jessica.
Yes, so there's tons of resources. I think one of the easiest areas that counselors can really double down on is like the understanding of that financial aid award letter. So there's a bunch of free apps. Swift Student, I saw somebody posted that in the chat. You Aspire also has an awesome free tool. And so we can just start, like our juniors are crunching the numbers so they can set their scholarship goals, right? Point them in the direction of how much money they actually need to be raised to be able to financially stay on campus. And so I would definitely recommend starting with those tools. In terms of like the local money, we always do our heavy hitters, the community foundations in the area, local credit unions, fraternities, sororities, those organizations that really care about the young people. Like we think college funding should be a community affair. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about like the top 15 or 20 groups that are going to really push to close the gaps for the students in the communities that we serve.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you to all of the panelists who've offered just a wealth of information on this conversation. For those of you who weren't able to watch the whole thing, this has been recorded, so you will be able to go to a blog post that we have to see all of our prior conversations and this one. And I hope you're able to join us on February 23rd with a conversation that we're having with our class of 2020 and class of 2021 Excellence in College Counseling winners. We'll have that conversation February 23rd, and you can register. I think Meredith's going to drop the link in the chat where you can register. Thank you so much to our partners at Common App, Reach Higher, Collegewise, everyone behind the scenes who's made this possible, absolutely to our panelists, and to all of you who joined in as participants. Thank you and have a great day, everybody.